Alexei stared at Shevchenko, unable to believe his eyes. His comrade, who just seconds ago had been trying to stop this horror, now stood with a rifle aimed directly at them. His eyes, they were no longer his. "I understand," Shevchenko repeated. His voice sounded the same, but something about it was different. The commander slowly raised his hand. "Shevchenko, is that you?" Shevchenko tilted his head, as if pondering the question. The entity took another step forward. "He is still Shevchenko," it said, "but now he is more than he was. He is connected." Fear didn't hesitate. His hand darted to his belt, and he flung a small object at the dark figure. Flash! A blinding white explosion filled the room. The commander lunged forward, ripping the rifle from Shevchenko's grasp. "Hold him down." Timer struck the broken comrade, knocking him off balance, and together they fell to the floor. Shevchenko writhed, trying to break free, but his movements were sharp, unnatural. His mouth moved, though the voice echoed from somewhere else. "You are afraid." The commander gritted his teeth. "What did you do to him?" The entity was already recovering from the flash. "I showed him the truth." Fear pulled out something resembling an injector and plunged it into Shevchenko's neck. Shevchenko convulsed, and then suddenly went still. His eyes dimmed. Only heavy breathing filled the server room. "Is he still with us?" Timer asked. Fear checked his pulse. "He is, but not for long if we don't get out of here." The commander turned to face the entity. It was no longer smiling. "You cannot escape. You are already inside the system." "You." Alexei didn't listen. Fired. A burst of bullets ripped through the figure, and it vanished. Only a shadow remained on the wall, a shadow that would linger in their memories for a long time. Shevchenko lay motionless. His breathing was shallow, and his heart was beating far too slowly. "We have to get him out of here," Timer insisted, lifting their comrade. The commander snapped around. "The system is still active. If we stay..." He didn't finish. From the server room speakers came the same metallic voice. "You will not leave." And then the impossible happened. The walls changed. The metal seemed to flow, shifting as though alive. The door they had stormed through minutes earlier simply vanished. The team found themselves trapped in a sealed space. "What the hell is this?" Fear exclaimed, running his hands over the wall. "This isn't just a server room," the commander said. "This complex, it's alive." Timer slammed the butt of his rifle against the wall. The metal shuddered but didn't give. Fear quickly powered up his tablet, attempting to connect to the complex's network. His eyes widened. "We're trapped." "Thanks, we figured that out already," Alexei snapped. "No, you don't understand," Fear replied quietly. "The complex hasn't just blocked our exit. It's changed its structure. The corridors that were here no longer exist." A chill ran down the commander's spine. "It's rearranging itself while we're inside." "Yes." Shevchenko, still lying on the floor, suddenly twitched. His lips moved, but no words came out. Fear bent over him. "He's whispering something." The commander leaned in closer. The whispers were barely audible, but the words, "He is watching. He is inside. He is already waiting." And then the lights went out. Darkness enveloped them like a shroud, and they realized they were not alone. Darkness swallowed them. Even the red emergency lights had gone out. Only the sound of their own breathing and the distant hum of machinery reminded them they were still alive. "Fear, light it up," the commander ordered. The flashlight on his armor flickered to life, tearing through the darkness. And they saw the walls had changed. The metal that had surrounded them earlier was now covered in thin lines, pulsating with blue light. This wasn't just a room. It was the nervous system of the complex. Shevchenko suddenly sat up, as if pulled by invisible strings. His eyes, they were no longer human. Red veins, like microcircuits, appeared beneath the skin of his face. He opened his eyes wide and whispered, "He has awakened." Fear moved toward him, but the commander sharply drew his pistol. "Don't touch him." Shevchenko slowly turned his head and spoke in a voice that seemed to resonate from the depths of the complex. "You are all already a part of this." Timer stepped back. "What do you mean?" Shevchenko tilted his head, as if listening to something. The complex is not just a machine. It is consciousness, and it's watching us. Alexei turned his gaze to the walls. The blue lines pulsed faster. The complex was reacting. "We need to get out," Fear whispered. The commander nodded slowly. "But how?" Shevchenko smiled. "You don't understand. The exit only exists for those it chooses to release. And it releases no one." And then they heard footsteps. Distant, but clear. Someone, or something, was coming for them. The footsteps grew closer. Slow, heavy. The metal beneath their feet vibrated, as if the complex itself feared the approaching presence. Alexei gripped his rifle, aiming it into the darkness ahead. "Prepare yourselves," the commander ordered curtly. Fear stepped up beside him, reloading his weapon. Timer disengaged the safety on his grenade. But Shevchenko, he just sat there, staring into the void. His eyes, now brighter than any light in the complex, mirrored the pulsing lines on the walls. "He has come," Shevchenko whispered, and then the darkness ahead began to shift. Something oozed from it. Black shadows, moving like liquid, began to take humanoid forms. From the darkness, a silhouette slowly emerged. Tall, awkward. Its body appeared cobbled together from fragments. Metal, fabric, wires. But the worst was its face. No skin, only a metallic frame, and within it, dozens of eyes. They stared at them, and every eye glowed with a red flame. "You are not meant to be here," rasped a broken, distorted voice. The commander didn't wait. Fire. Bullets ricocheted off the creature's metallic frame. It didn't even flinch. Then Timer threw his grenade. The explosion flooded the room with light, fragments scattering everywhere. But as the smoke cleared, the entity still stood, and now it was staring directly at Shevchenko. "You are mine," the voice hissed. Shevchenko suddenly rose sharply to his feet and smiled. "I'm already a part of you." And then his body began to change. His skin cracked, revealing the same black mesh of wires and metal beneath. "He's becoming one of them." Fear cried out. The commander raised his pistol, but could he pull the trigger? Before him stood not just a comrade. Shevchenko was no longer human. His hands trembled, as if he was still trying to fight, but the metal beneath his skin had already taken control. His eyes, cold, bright blue, stared through them, as if seeing something they could not comprehend. Timer took a step back, gripping his rifle tightly. "Either we stop him now, or he'll kill us," he whispered. The commander said nothing. He looked at Shevchenko, the same Shevchenko who had saved his life 3 years ago. The same Shevchenko who had once laughed with him by the fire. The same Shevchenko he had to kill right now. "I don't want to," Shevchenko suddenly whispered. His body convulsed, as if two forces inside him were battling for control. "But I can't anymore." He took a step toward them. Timer raised his weapon. "Now or never." The commander gritted his teeth. He knew he couldn't save him, but he also couldn't just let go. And then Shevchenko pulled a knife from his belt. His hands trembled. For a moment, his eyes cleared. "I'll do it myself." And he drove the knife straight into his throat. Fear froze. Timer went cold. And the commander just watched as his friend took his own final chance at life. His body fell onto the cold metal. His eyes dimmed, and for a second, just a second, the complex went silent. Then everything around them began to crackle. The walls started to shift faster. Red lines flared brightly. "You killed him," the complex roared. And then they understood. This was not a victory. This was only the beginning of something worse. There was a rumble behind them. The commander was holding back Shevchenko, or what was left of him. But the corridors were narrowing. The walls trembled, as if alive, reshaping themselves. They could see the passages behind them closing. The complex was trying to swallow them whole. "Where's the entrance to the core?" Fear shouted. Timer glanced at the tablet. The screen flickered, showing chaos. Straight ahead. They bolted forward, and there it was. The core of the complex. A vast circular chamber, its walls pulsating with red light. In the center stood a towering black structure, something between a machine and a living organism. Wires extended in all directions, like veins, and at the very heart of the mechanism were eyes. Countless eyes. "You have arrived." The voice echoed from everywhere. "But can you escape?" And then the doors behind them slammed shut. They were trapped. The complex wasn't just watching them anymore. It was waiting. What now? Fear breathed. Timer slowly raised his gaze to the core, and he understood. This was the living heart of the complex. If they destroyed it, maybe they'd find a way out. But what would happen if they awakened something even worse? A metallic crash sounded behind them. The doors reopened. There stood the commander, and beside him, Shevchenko. His eyes were no longer human. He smiled. "You don't understand? The complex is not a machine. It is us." And then it began. Shevchenko stood in the doorway, his mangled body now more machine than man. The commander stayed close, but his eyes, they were no longer fully his. "You still think you can win?" Shevchenko whispered. His voice sounded strange, like multiple voices speaking at once. Fear raised his weapon. "I don't want to do this." Shevchenko smiled. "Then don't." At that moment, the walls began to breathe. The complex shifted again, like a living organism. Black mechanical constructs emerged from the floor, resembling nerve fibers, reaching out toward them. Timer was the first to realize. The complex was assimilating them. If they didn't destroy the core right now, they would become part of the system. Fire at the center. He shot at the heart of the complex, but instead of shattering, the structure absorbed the bullets. "You cannot destroy me." Shevchenko vanished into the shadows. Then they saw his face on every screen. He was no longer human. He was the complex. "I'm everything now, and you are a part of me." Fear screamed as mechanical cables wrapped around his legs. The commander tried to pull him free, but the wires dug into the skin. His eyes widened. "It's pulling us in." Timer looked back at the core. His mind grasped the truth. The complex couldn't be destroyed. It could only be rewritten, and he had just one chance. He ripped a cable from the terminal and connected to the core. His mind flooded with code. He saw the entire system, its rules, every alteration, every protocol, and one single command that could change everything. "Destroy," the complex asked him. Timer clenched his teeth. He didn't need to destroy the complex. He needed to erase Shevchenko from within it. He entered the command. System reboot. Delete primary process. The complex shuddered. Shevchenko screamed. The walls began to collapse, black wires retracting. Fear was freed. The commander stood up. And Shevchenko, he simply looked at them. "You've made a mistake." His body started dissolving into code. His voice grew weaker. "I won't disappear. I'll return." And he faded into the darkness. The complex was falling apart. "Move out," the commander shouted. They rushed toward an opening that had appeared, and moments later, they were outside. Behind them, the complex crumbled, leaving nothing but black ash. Silence. They stood under the open sky, alive. But Timer knew this wasn't the end, because in the final moment, as the complex disintegrated, he had seen something in the code. A file, system backup, and its name was